Hey, hello and welcome. This is the Remote Podcast, and I am your host, Victor Kung. You're listening to episode 1. Welcome again to the Remote Podcast. I'm really excited about this series, and it's been a long time coming. So, this first episode is going to be structured a bit differently. First, I'm going to introduce myself and to share a little bit about my background. Then, I'll talk about why I started the Remote Podcast and what the series is about. Lastly, I'll go into the content and structure of each podcast and more or less the takeaways that I want you to get from listening to this series. So let's get started. In February 2016, I decided to quit my job and work remotely. That decision changed my life. Since then, I've worked as a freelancer, I started my own creative agency, and began traveling the world. During this time, I also started a blog called The Remote Lifestyle, which chronicles my transition from a corporate 9-to-5 to working for myself. I wrote it as a resource for other people who wanted to transition into this remote lifestyle. So now I want to take a step back all the way into my childhood. I grew up in Taiwan and China, and growing up the mentality was to work hard so that I could get into a good college. Once I was in college, the goal was to work hard so that I could get a good job and build a great career. Being the hardworking child I was, I did both of those things. But when I actually ended up starting my first job, I felt like something was off. I didn't enjoy it. And I didn't understand why, because my job offered everything. I had great pay, great benefits, and I was in a great office environment. I had awesome coworkers who did cool activities every Friday. But I just wasn't happy. So I decided to switch companies. I switched companies in the hope that I would find what I was missing. But when I started my new job, it was the same thing. I had everything a good job was supposed to have, but for whatever reason, I couldn't appreciate it. I felt really guilty, actually. I wondered to myself, why can't I just appreciate what I have? Maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe I'm asking for too much and I should just settle down and be content with what I have. So I struggled with these feelings for quite some time. Until I went to the Hive Global Leadership Program in San Francisco. I remember this very, very clearly. It was January of 2015. It was a 3-day retreat in San Francisco consisting of over 100 people from all sorts of different backgrounds and ages, with one thing in common. Everyone was trying to find their purpose and passion in life. In those 3 days, I was forced to be brutally honest with myself and to answer the questions. 1. What is it I want to do with my life? 2. What did I care about? And 3. What did I want to be remembered for? Holding myself accountable for these questions changed everything for me. I quickly realized that what I was doing for my job didn't resonate and didn't align with what I wanted to do with my life and my goals for the future. First off, I wanted to work on projects that were meaningful to me, not just what was assigned. For my job, I was building websites for super large Fortune 500 companies. And oftentimes, the people at these companies don't really care about what they're doing. I want to work with people who care about what they do and to be able to make a tangible difference. Secondly, I want to travel and explore the world on a regular basis. Because for me, taking 2 weeks vacation every year just wasn't enough. But most of all, I wanted to own my time. I hated commuting and I hated having to be somewhere for 8 hours a day. I didn't understand why the workday required us to be in an office for a full 8 hours. It was completely independent of our productivity and our output. It was just time being used for the sake of using time. So I started doing research on what my options were. I read books, blogs, articles, listened to podcasts, and I soon realized that my best shot of living this type of lifestyle was to become a remote worker. To start off, what is remote work? Well, being a remote worker means that you can work from wherever you need to as long as you have computer and internet access. This blew my mind. If you think about it, throughout history, people have been rooted to certain geographic locations because of their jobs. Ask anyone why they're in a certain place, and they'll probably say, oh, it's because of my job. Your job is the number one geographic anchor that ties you down. People spend over 50% of their waking hours at work or doing work-related activities, such as preparing for work and commuting. But how much of this time you're spending is actually being used productively. People all over the world are starting to catch on to this, and they're asking themselves why things have to be this way. With the rapid growth of internet technology in the last few years, this no longer has to be the only way. Quitting your job to work remote is no longer something crazy. It's a rational lifestyle choice. Working remotely is the key to being able to use all your time productively, to take all the time that would otherwise be wasted by unproductive work activities, and to be able to use that time for yourself as you see fit. I came across this Harvard study a few years ago, and it discussed how one of the largest determinants of happiness is the amount of time that you have for yourself, to discover those passions you may have, to do those things you enjoy to do, or to spend that time with the people you care about. So as I continue to look into remote work, it became very clear to me that there were two paths that I could take. One, I could work remotely as an employee for a company, or two, I could work as a freelancer. Both were good options, but the most important thing I needed to do then was to make sure that I had the skill set to work remote. The good thing for me is that I already had a lot of these skills through working in the tech industry. I was also working as a freelance web developer at the time, so my skill set matched perfectly. To prepare myself to make the jump, I also needed to learn some practical skills. For example, how to write legal contracts, how to get individual health insurance. So I perused articles, blogs, and books. I did everything I could to make sure I covered all my bases. I also started doing freelance work in addition to my full-time job. And finally, in February 2016, after making sure that I had 3 months of freelance work to cover my ass, I finally took the leap and quit my job. As I was making this transition, I also kept a blog called The Remote Lifestyle. I used it as a way to keep track of everything I did and also as a way to share the lessons that I'd learned. As I continue living this remote lifestyle, I would like to keep adding to the blog so that there are more resources for people who want to make this transition as well. I feel very strongly about this because as I was making the jump, a lot of the resources I read were all over the place, scattered across websites, blogs, and books. A lot of these resources were also outdated and were written by people who have done it 10 years ago. As a result, I think it's very important for there to be a knowledge base that's curated by people who are still navigating this transition. This way, all the material is up to date and very relatable to a millennial audience. So this is where the remote podcast comes in. Since I've transitioned to remote work, I've had the pleasure of meeting other people who are living this type of lifestyle as well. And the coolest thing I learned from these conversations is that there is no one way of living and working remotely. Everyone does it their own way. It could be based on their own interests, their own circumstances in life, and whatnot. And this is the key takeaway that I want to share with other people. That's why I started the remote podcast. I asked myself one day, what if I can take all these wonderful conversations that I'm having with other remote workers, conversations that I'm learning so much from, and package them in a way where I can share it with millions of people all over the world. People who might be thinking of living this lifestyle, but might not know what to do or where to start. Or might not know anyone who is also doing this. Because this was also one of the struggles I had when I was first starting out. I was reading about people having this type of lifestyle, but I didn't actually know anyone who was also doing it. So it felt so scary. It felt like I was doing something that wasn't correct or accepted by the people around me. It made me scared to take the jump. In other words, the remote podcast is the resource that I wish I had access to when I was making all the decisions and mulling over whether I should make this jump or not. I want you to be able to have access to the stories and the experiences of remote workers all over the world doing all types of jobs and living all types of lifestyles. So here's how each episode will work. First, I'll start out by giving you an overview of what we are going to talk about and who our guest is. Then we'll jump straight into the interview. Or I wouldn't even call it an interview, it's more like a conversation between me and our guest. And lastly, I'll do a recap and I'll be sure to list out all the resources we talked about. I'll also include a transcription of the entire conversation so you can refer to it in text form if that's easy for you. Occasionally, I'll also run a few of the episodes by myself, but I'll make sure to only do this when I have really specific lessons and actionable insights to share with you. So I don't know about you guys, but I'm pretty excited for this. I'll be honest with you, Working and living remotely isn't always easy, and there are tough days. But if you're anything like me, you can see the opportunity here. This is a chance to fundamentally change how you live your life and to break free of the shackles that have tied people down for generations. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If you want to learn more information about the remote lifestyle or about myself and what I've been up to, just visit my website at theremotelifestyle.com. So that's THEREMOTE lifestyle.com. So that's all for today, and I'll see you in the next episode of the Remote Podcast, where we will be bringing on our very first guest. Take care.